Hello again. It's me, your favorite nighttime guard for the Cashmere Botanical Gardens. I thought I might pop in and tell you how the new management's working out, since it's only been a few months since hostile takeover seems to suit what happened best, but I suppose most of us that were involved would be considered the hostile ones. I'm settling into my new life pretty well, though being a brandy-low has some changes. I haven't really got used to all of them yet. For one, my food budget has gone down to zero since I don't really need to eat anymore. I take all my nourishment from just being in close proximity to the lady, which has also facilitated a move into the park. Since being a brandy-low doesn't really pay anything, this was probably for the best, since it would have made paying rent difficult. I was a little miffed about that at the start, but Randy explained it all to me, and I feel like I have a better grasp on it. We ain't human anymore, partner. We're servants to the lady now, and as her vassals, this is all we need. After all that, things got a lot easier. The botanical gardens were closed for a few weeks, so we could get everything ready for the grand reopening ceremony. I told you all about it at the end of the last story. Dr. Thurston stepped down, and the lady, the townspeople know her as Miss Viridian, officially became the head of the gardens. She's been working tirelessly on the new exhibits, and it's strange to watch what she does. I told you once that the lady seemed both hundreds of years old and new as spring flowers. As she works, this is made very apparent. She doesn't have to wait, this lady of the growing season. She isn't impatient, she isn't impetuous, but she has no time for things like seasons or growing cycles. She brings flowers to maturity in the blink of an eye, and then makes them live long past their days. I don't think anyone notices this. Who notices one particular flower over another, right? But when you spend all your time at the park, you tend to notice new growth, and the intricate nature of the existing growth. I've been thinking about things like that a lot. Growth cycles and the like. I never used to, and it's kind of strange. That was how we came to notice the disturbance for the first time, and it gave me a shudder. It all began when I found Randy on top of the water tower we keep on the property. He was looking at something with his binoculars, and he didn't seem to like it, whatever it was. I was up the ladder and beside him in a flash, my new body still surprising even me, and he seemed unsurprised to find me at his elbow. "Something's coming," he said, offering me the binoculars. I looked through them into the wide swath of woods that grew behind the garden, and saw something shaking the trees. It was big, whatever it was, and as it passed through the forest, it shook the tops of the verdant sea. I wasn't sure how I felt about it, the rumbling making it seem like an army was marching out, and when I handed the binoculars back, I asked if he knew what it was. "Not sure, but it looks like we'll know sometime tomorrow." Turns out, Randy was mistaken. I would discover what it was later that night. It may seem silly for a group of creatures like us to need security, but I guess some habits die hard. Night shifts are easier now, since I don't really need to sleep anymore. The closest I come to sleeping is lying in the tall grass that surrounds the reflecting pool and closing my eyes. I don't really dream, but sometimes I see flashes of things. They're like little movies from long ago times. I'm not sure what they are, but they make me feel nostalgic somehow, even though I don't seem to be the one living in them. Sorry, I was wool gathering. It's harder to focus my mind sometimes than it used to be. Anyway, so I was sitting at the security desk that night, watching cameras and keeping an eye peeled, when something big suddenly slid in front of one of the cameras. I switched over to the picture in question, looking for the source of the movement, but I couldn't find it. It was very reminiscent of the moving trees, the forest friends of the lady, but they had ceased moving after she was done with her coup. They had always been a sort of extension of her will, and their desire to be free of their containment of treedom. I wondered if this might be something similar, and I flipped around to a few other camera angles to see if I could catch it again. When it remained elusive, I picked up my flashlight and went to investigate. I found Randy doing similar as I came around the wheel of exhibits and into the park proper. "Something's here. I caught sight of it, but it's quick." "What do you think it is?" I asked him. "I don't know, but it did a number on the front gate. Kinda came half over it and half through it. I've got some of the other guys fixing it, but we gotta figure out what it is. Help me find it, will you? I don't know if it's of her court or of his. I'd like to know if there's something dangerous in our midst." I nodded, moving off into the shadowy park with my flashlight out. The exhibits were a little different now that the lady had set up shop. Plots that had once contained showings of local flora and rare plants now held strange hybrids, examples of many different species existing together. Even a few areas containing poisonous plants and dangerous fungi. None of it would hurt me. I was a champion of summer now, but it was amazing that we didn't lose more guests to some of the things she just had sitting around. I heard a loud creak behind me and turned to find a scattering of leaves and a discarded bird's nest in the path that had once been clear. Whatever it was heading towards the small grove we had set up last week. The grove was truly spectacular. The lady had an old-growth forest in one of the exhibit rings, and people said it could very well be the only old growth in captivity that they had ever seen. It was amazing how quickly we had brought these trees to maturity, and even now it was something to stand amongst the towering examples of primordial flora. You could see them from anywhere in the park. Hell, you could see them from the parking lot sometimes. And as I approached, I noticed something was out of place. Standing before the old growth of trees like a child standing at the head of a family photo was a much smaller specimen. It stood on roots that looked snaky beneath it. They wiggled against the stones, looking for the dirt that lay below them. The tree had no face, none that I could see, but it was looking at the magnificent bark gargantuans with the same awe that I had felt. I didn't think it was as dangerous as Randy believed. Just another tourist on a sightseeing trip. It's hard to feel regarded by something that doesn't have a face, but I had its full attention as much as it had mine. When it came at me, it sounded like roots groaning in a high wind. It reminded me again of the tree that had nearly run me over on that night not so long ago, and I threw myself aside as it barreled towards me. When it pivoted and came at me again, I realized it might not be as mindless as I had thought it was. "How dare you?" I would have said that it screamed this at me, but screaming doesn't really do it justice. The tree groaned at me. The tree grew at me as its bark creaked and its voice bellowed from deep within. It shook wind from its branches as a gale swam through it. It did all of these. It did none of these. And I was suddenly terrified. Unlike the last time, however, I had grown a little myself. When it shot a wiggling root at me, I caught it and pushed it aside. The tree seemed confused by this, but its rage was no less potent. It scampered at me, scamper being the best word I can think to describe it, and when I leapt aside, it crashed into the stone fence. The structure rattled a little, but the craftsmanship was sturdy, and it held up, if not with a little bit of protest. It was odd to think of a tree being nimble, but this one was quick. No young spruce or spring pine here. This one had some rings in its belly. Case in point, when I went to jump aside again to get out of the way, it caught me with a long tendril and held me fast. Stupid, I thought. I'd been stupid, and now I was caught. It pulled me in close, and I was worried that it meant to smash me against its bark and be done with me. As I drew closer, I saw the bark twist as a face appeared from its depths. The features were old, wood carved 1,000 years ago, and when they came to life, it regarded me with something akin to trepidation. The round wooden eyes blinked owlishly, trying to make sense of me, and as it leaned closer, I tried not to let it see my fear. "Brandy Low, why do you trap my family here? Your lady will not thank you for this." It was my turn to be confused. "I didn't trap anyone. I brought your dying kin here, old one," came the voice of summer, wafting behind me like a cold breeze in the heat of July. We both of us turned, watching as the pale lady came gliding between Randy and another Brandy Low I wasn't as familiar with, Jock or Regis or one of the ones who'd come with her. Randy had his shotgun out, the old symbol of his authority, and the other held a woodsman's axe at the ready. They stood to block her, to protect this ancient being from harm, and when she touched their shoulders, they parted like bat-wing doors. As she approached the old tree, it turned its attention away from me, and bent down to eye level with the mistress of spring. "Why have you imprisoned my kin here, my lady? They want nothing but to grow and flourish within our forest, outside the harassment of axe and flame." When she touched his trunk, the old wood seemed to lighten, and a groan of pleasure ran through his wooden throat. "And they have found it here. When I discovered them, they were close to death. These giants who have seen the rise and fall of centuries were in danger of being lost forever. They sleep now, their bodies regrowing, their minds knitting, and I hope that someday they will be as they were once again." "I would like to see that too," the tree whispered, and when it let me go, I scampered back to stand with Randy and the others. "You all right?" Randy asked, gun at the ready. "Yeah, things quicker than it looks. Don't you worry about that. Regis and I can handle it if it decides not to play nice." I appreciated Randy's zeal, but I was skeptical about what a shotgun could do against something as thick and old as this tree. After some quiet talk, the pale lady put her hands on either side of its wooden face and leaned up to kiss its forehead. Even bent, the tree was massive, and she looked childlike as she balanced on the tips of her toes. As they parted, the tree moved off towards the old growth section, walking amidst its larger brethren as it disappeared into the grove. The lady returned to us, saying it was time to go. "Is he done kicking up Dickens?" Randy asked, falling in behind us. "I believe he is. Racefell is a proud old tree, and I gave him a position worthy of him. That was how we gained a guardian for our grove. Racefell stayed on and tended to his kin, and he seemed to relish the work. He apologized for his rash actions, saying he had misjudged the situation, and I later found out a lot more about the old tree than I can say here. After our initial encounter, Racefell and I became fast friends, and I was glad to have him at our side. The summer had only just begun, but already there was a fair amount of excitement. Who can say what else might come? I suppose I have a long time to find out, don't I? Hey everyone, it's your favorite security guard again. Winter is fast approaching here at the Cashmere Botanical Gardens, and the tourists are really flocking to see the exhibits we have. The lady's outdone herself with some of the wonders here, and with our new grove, complete with guardian, admission has gone through the roof. There's also the living wood display, the toxic fauna room, the collection of tropical specimens grown right here on the premise, and the island of lilies that still holds the stone form of our founder. Today, however, I'm here to talk about a problem that's been cropping up from members of security lately. I'm speaking, of course, about the gnomes. Now, when people talk about gnomes, you have a certain idea of what they should look like, don't you? You think about colorful clothes and pointy hats and little white beards and cheery expressions. Maybe you think about short little creatures that scuttle around in the tall grass and hide from people. If that's what you're thinking, then you couldn't be further from the truth. I had seen them before, but I had no idea what they were. They didn't exactly look the way you would expect. Gnomes kind of resemble a ginseng root that's learned to walk. They're thick-bodied and brown, with strange red eyes and a mouthful of wiggly teeth. They don't wear clothes, but it doesn't seem to be much of a problem, because they don't have anything to cover. They dig through the dirt like moles and have been eating the vegetables in our garden by the handful. That was my first encounter with them, actually. I was coming on shift, making my way towards the gardens after stopping a bunch of tourists from trampling a display as they took pictures, when something bumped into my shin. I looked down and found the ugly little thing running from the gardens with carrots under its arms. It made a face at me. No mean feat for something that barely has a head. Martin, one of the other Brandylow, came tearing after it, yelling about vegetable thieves with a bleat and a clop of his hooves. The thing grabbed its spoils and beat feet, rounding a hedge as it fled into the garden. Martin huffed as he came even with me, out of breath and sweating as he pushed his glasses back on his face. "Damn things! The hell was that?" I asked. "No idea. They showed up this morning and started eating everything they could lay hands on." He went back to work then, the little creature long gone, and I went back to patrolling the grounds. There had been a lot of strange things lately. Trees with human faces and pumpkin-headed minions that had delivered war proclamations. But it was all sort of becoming normal by this point. I moved towards the Colors of Spring exhibit and found a few visitors watching something at work inside the ring. As I came up, an older man approached me, pointing and saying that there was some kind of animal in the exhibit. "It looks like one of those naked mole rat things. It's ruining your flower display." Sure enough, as I watched, something kept yanking the buds from beneath the ground. As it came up to eat them, I saw the horrid little thing that had been stealing carrots, though I knew it couldn't be the same one. As another popped up as well, I gritted my teeth. There was more than one of them, likely a lot more, and as I waded into the display, I wasn't certain I could get my hands on them. They looked unpleasant, and as I reached into the hole, I felt one of them latch onto my hand with its knobbly little teeth. As I yanked my hand out and looked at the weird little bites, I was even less certain that I could catch them. After some time spent digging, I was left with nothing to show but dirty knees and filthy hands. With nothing to show for my efforts, I went back to talk to Randy about it. Randy, however, was already aware of them. "Yeah, they've been wrecking up the place all day. They just kind of showed up yesterday and have been a real pain in the ass ever since." In the short time they had been here, they had eaten up most of the crops, wrecked up several of the exhibits, and made Racefell very upset after causing damage to his grove. They had been seen by quite a few guests, too, and that was something that would be harder to explain. We had to keep a low profile while we were here, so as not to scare our customers. We would give our lives to protect the lady, but she had decreed that we cover our hooves and keep our natures a secret for as long as possible, and these gnomes were going to mess that up. Looking over the reports, it didn't look good. "So what do we do about them?" I asked, watching the cameras and noticing more of them roaming around the park. "I don't see any way around it," Randy said. "We got to talk to the lady." Before we could set out, though, someone else wanted our help. "Randy!" someone yelled, their fists preceding their words by a heartbeat. "Randy, there are gnomes destroying my greenhouse!" We opened the door to find Tobias in a real state. Tobias was responsible for the greenhouses that bred the rare species seen in the park. He was a talented botanist or something, and he was one of the older Brandylow that the lady had brought with her. He wasn't usually prone to outbursts, and if he was here, then it meant that something bad was happening back at the greenhouses. "Gnomes?" Randy asked. "Like the little things that sit in people's yards?" Tobias rolled his eyes. "That's rubbish, human nonsense. Gnomes are servants of the lady, but they're running amok, and they won't listen to me. I need your help before they ruin the samples I'm growing in the special housing area." Randy grabbed his club, a big iron-headed thing that the lady had given him as a symbol of his authority, and his shotgun because you could never be too careful. Those of us who considered ourselves to be under Randy's authority, the guards from before the botanical garden had changed hands, carried shortened clubs with metal heads on them as well, and I drew mine out as the three of us headed off to see what was going on. What we found was pure pandemonium. The greenhouse was full of the little things. They were stuffing everything that grew into their mouths, and the brandylow that worked here were chasing them around as they tried to protect the various projects. I remembered wondering how many there were, and now I could see the breadth of what we were dealing with. The ground was thick with them, something like 100 or more, swarming like ants over everyone and everything. They moved atop the brandylow as well, swarming them beneath their sheer numbers, and I looked at Brandy as he blew out a short breath in frustration. "What are we gonna do?" "Like you have to ask," he said, swinging the shotgun behind him on the cord around his shoulder. "We gotta get rid of them." As we moved among them, our clubs swung in a wide arc. We didn't seem to be doing much to them, our clubs smacking them but doing no lasting trauma to the little buggers. They were like dolls, their body full of smushy nothing, and they absorbed everything and came back stronger. For every one that we knocked aside, 2 more came on. We were slapped, bitten, stomped on by more feet than I'd ever seen before. Their teeth were mushy, but within lay a core like stone. They ground against us as we tried to stop them, but we weren't without options. Randy began tossing them out the door, bouncing them out of the greenhouse after ripping them off of our arms and legs. It didn't stop them from coming right back, but it seemed more like Randy enjoyed bouncing them off the ground than anything. Randy said a lot of things I really can't say here in a family-friendly setting, but when they stopped trying to bury us beneath their numbers, we both looked up to find our benefactor standing at the door of the greenhouse. She looked amused, but there was definitely some annoyance behind it. "What is the meaning of this?" The gnomes stopped moving, all of them turning beady eyes on the immaculate lady. Tobias was with her, standing behind her flowery dress like a little kid, and as she came inside, he looked at the sea of gnomes like a younger sibling who's tattled on someone naughty. He needn't have bothered, though. The gnomes had all stopped where they stood, bowing and scraping as they showed abeyance to their lady. From their ranks came an older gnome, wrinklier and more bent than the others. He bent low before her, and when he spoke, it sounded like one of those chipmunks from an old cartoon show. "My lady, we've found you at last." "Vladimir, my old friend, why did you not come to me immediately when you arrived?" The old gnome looked up, and though contrite, he still had the gleam of mischief about him. "1,000 pardons, my lady. We were hungry from our long trip, and were trying to feed our masses, so we might seek you out." The lady nodded, not convinced in the least bit, but mollified nonetheless. "Well, since you're full now, I have work for your kind. Come with me, but you must be cautious. The people here do not know of your kind, as I do, and they do not trust what they do not know. You must remain hidden, as my brandylow do, and out of sight. The winter approaches, and I will have need of you and your little ones to spy on my enemies." The gnomes went with her, and they caused minimal trouble after that. There were still vegetables missing from time to time, and some of the exhibits were chewed on some, but the gnomes did help now and then, and were ever the eyes of the summer lady. The guests were not bothered by them. Most of the gnomes weren't even seen by daylight, and we entered a shaky alliance with them. Some of the brandylow, though Toby was not amongst them, were even glad to see them, telling us of times they had helped them win battles or plot the movements of winter with their spy network. You're too young to know much of the coming war, but you'll discover it soon enough, Marshall told us one evening as we sat about the fire. In times of war, a spy network is often worth its weight in gold, or, in the Gnomes' case, fresh produce and consternation. So if you visit the park, do not fear the stubby potato people that you may or may not see. The Gnomes are the least dangerous thing that make Cashmere Botanical Gardens their home, and certainly not what you should be keeping an eye peeled for. Welcome back for another visit to Cashmere. It's your favorite night guard here again for another update from Cashmere Botanical Gardens. Today marks about a month since our grand reopening, and today we open our brand new tree exhibit. And if you thought the moving guardian tree was unsettling, then wait till you see what we have today. The fourth ring is now home to the trees with human faces. On the first day of the exhibit's grand opening, 3 trees were sitting in the ring, each with a different face. One was the face of a young man, complete with wavy hair that ran down his back and into the bark. The second was a middle-aged man, his glasses immaculately carved into the front of the wood. The third was the most chilling, an old woman with a ghostly O for a mouth and a gray bun that sat atop her head. Her face was frozen in shock, and she looked as if her last moments had been truly horrific. The people came to see them from across the county, and they even had some postcards printed up with their likeness. They were intrigued by the carvings, and I didn't correct them as I maybe should have. I knew that no knife had carved those faces. I'd watched her ladyship grow them herself, and they had sprung from the ground with the faces emblazoned in the wood. It's an honor to watch the lady work. She's so delicate, so precise, and she walks her plants through the stage of life like a video in fast motion. The lily pond was where she seemed to do most of her work, and it was there that she made her most impressive constructs. I was lucky enough to be asked to help tonight. She put together the trees with the faces, and it's something that I'll never forget. She'd gathered a few of us around her, and helping seemed to be her way of asking us to lend some of the essence that she had gifted us with. I'd helped before. The old-growth forest had taken a lot of energy and a lot of sessions, but it was worth it to get to watch her shape the wood and the plants. She drew a seed from the depths of the lily pond, the surface swirling with effort as she aged it from a seed to sapling, from sapling to tree. The leaves and branches began to sprout. The roots began to run, and as the face appeared, I remember gasping in surprise. It was as startling then as it was now, and I watched the teenage boy take shape upon the wood with startling clarity. She moved her hands like a maestro, weaving a symphony of wood before finally letting it splash into the pond, her work completed. Please, take it to the fourth ring, and be sure it has enough room to stretch. It will have company soon. True to her word, she made 2 others that night, and now they all stood within the ring, with room for more to come. No one seemed to question how 3 fully grown trees had simply risen from the Georgia soil, seemingly overnight, but they came in droves to see them. We usually had to keep a close watch over the new exhibits, guests wanting to climb inside for a closer look. But these trees seemed to be the exception. The guests crowded the barriers, snapped their pictures, and looked on in wonder. But they didn't get too close to these odd bits of flora. I suppose maybe it was something uncanny about the details on the human face. Or maybe they, like me, thought they might bite if they got too close. No one seemed in a hurry to cross the metal bar, that separated the exhibits from the park. They were only a little freaky at first, but after only a week of being introduced to the park, they shifted into something downright spooky. One night, they started whispering. I was on night shift, something I like to do more often than not, and as I came around the fourth ring, I heard someone talking in a low voice. I looked around for other Brandylow, but I couldn't find anyone besides myself near the exhibit. It wasn't really like someone talking quietly either, not like a secret conversation or anything. It was more like someone whispering, someone who whispers instead of talks, and has gotten quite comfortable with it. The longer I listened, the more it sounded like a constant stream of spidery words, the kind that crawl across your ears from the mouth of an open mausoleum or from a cave at night. It was the skittering voice of the damned, and the closer I got to the exhibit, the surer I was that I didn't want to see who was talking. Coming within sight of the ring, I could see the light from the nearby lamppost as it lit the hellish faces, and I was unsurprised to see the lips of one moving in painful, creaking groans. It was the old woman, and the effort of speech seemed to be causing her as much pain as the tree itself. The wood creaked and groaned, unused to movements of that kind, and the whispers were coming from a throat with no opening. Her eyes had been brown and sightless just this morning, staring out into the park, but now they possessed a glassiness that made me think they were capable of sight. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could hear it from across the barrier and knew that the guests would be able to hear it tomorrow if it continued. I wanted to go to the lady, wanted to go to Randy, but also found that I wanted to hear what wisdom came from her. I had learned from my time as a Brandylow, as short as it had been, that there was wisdom in natural things, especially the old one. Racefell and I had had many such talks while I was on shift, and the things he told me were amazing. He had seen the Ice Age, lived through the tectonic shift, and had seen many different peoples come and go. The tree was newer, but what knowledge could be taken from their wooden hearts? My curiosity led me to do something that none of the guests had been brave enough to do, and I jumped the barrier and approached the old woman. Her eyes stared ahead, their gaze fixed at the stars that twinkled beyond the glare of the lamplight. She was whispering, as if she needed to get her truth out before her breath was taken, and the closer I slunk, the more I came to realize it was the same thing again and again. It wasn't a story. It wasn't even really a conversation. It was the same 3 or 4 sentences, again and again, as she told her tales to the stars. I moved in closer, afraid to put my ear too close, but wanting to hear it all. Pretty lady calls me. Pretty lady on the island calls for me to come to her. I stepped into the water, but the roots drug me down. I saw her looking down at me as I sank beneath the water, smiling as my bubbles rose. It was chilling, but she kept saying it again and again. I was less enthusiastic as I left, and when she stopped whispering at around 5 o'clock, I was glad I wouldn't have to listen to her throughout the day. I knew that no matter where I was, that voice would follow me. The whispering came back for the next 2 nights, always the same pitch, and always the same words. On the second night, however, the middle-aged man began to speak as well. I knew that something was different when I walked past the 3rd ring and heard a different voice as I approached the 4th. I had almost gotten used to the old lady as she whispered ceaselessly, but tonight there was a new voice amongst the litany. It was deeper, but it still whispered. It rose above hers, but couldn't quite dwarf it. They mingled together, forming a chorus, and I was over the barrier before I could think better of it. I'd lost most of my trepidation over them. They were a cool mystery to figure out, and I was looking forward to learning more. She crooked her finger, promised me the experience of a lifetime. As I sank below the water, I thought of my wife and felt ashamed. The lady had been right. The last moments of my life were quite an experience. I shivered a little as he repeated, "This one was different." He was talking about how the lady, my benefactor, had lured him to his death. It wasn't as if I hadn't seen her do it before. She had dragged Dr. Thurston into the depths and drowned him. Did I think he had been the only one? This place was known for mysterious disappearances. People still disappeared here, in fact. And I suppose they had to be going somewhere. I'd watched her work miracles from that pool, but I suppose there had to be a cost somewhere for such wonders. After that, I did go to Randy, but this was far from news to him. "Yeah, sounds about right," he said. "What do you mean it sounds about right?" I asked, almost speechless. "Their bodies beneath the lily pond. We all know that. Hell, you saw the roots take Thurston and Carl. You think they were the only ones, did you?" My face must have looked weird because he turned and put a hand on my shoulder. "Won't do you any good to get upset about it. We're not human anymore, kid. The people below that water ain't either. Not anymore. They're meat now. Meat for the lady's table. Getting upset won't change it. Do your job. Serve the lady. Try not to think about the rest." I thought about that for the next few days as I walked my rounds, considering it all as I did my job. The job was all I really had left, as silly as that sounds. I was a creature with infinite time now, but I was still tied to the work I had been doing. This was my home now, I supposed, and the trees with faces weren't likely to be the strangest thing I ever saw. She had called my name 3 times before I looked up, and I immediately felt a cold chill run up me as I realized I'd been ignoring my lady. My apologies, lady. I was lost in thought. It won't happen again." I'd gone to a knee, certain I was about to be scolded, but she smiled as she lifted me to my feet. "Your thoughts are important, my Brandylow. I would never seek to break you from them. I was going for an evening stroll and was wondering if you would walk with me. Some nights I find that I could use the company." She offered me an arm, and this time I did not hesitate, as I had once upon a time. I had feared her, feared where she might lead me then, but I knew now that wherever she went, I would gladly follow. We were walking past the 4th ring, the murmuring still a chorus, when she stopped and smiled happily at the trees. "Such interesting creations, are they not?" They are," I answered, though I didn't look at them. "I intend to make more of them, you know. There is much nourishment within the pool for them to take form from. My lady, may I ask you something?" "Of course," she said. "You Brandylow are as children to me. I would refuse you nothing. Are the trees made from the people who go missing here?" I knew the answer, but I wanted to know if she would tell me. "They are," she said without hesitation. "The creatures of this world are such wonderful nourishment for the flora that they try to trample. It's only right that they should give back after crushing so much of it beneath their dwellings and their deeds. I stopped, trying to find a way to ask so it wouldn't make me sound crazy. "How is it that they talk? Are there souls there or something?" She cocked her head, seeming to think about the answer. "I don't know," she finally said, our route taking us past the old grove. "It's possible that something of their old self is trapped inside the wood, an echo of who they once were that will live on past their bodies. I didn't consider them strong enough for such, but I suppose these humans may be more interesting than I give them credit for. She left me then, saying she was going to the pool to do some work. I'll unveil the newest tree tomorrow, so don't be late for the ceremony. Pleasant evening. I watched her go, not sure if I was excited for what would come in the morning or not, but knowing I would be there nonetheless. The next morning saw a small crowd arrive early for the unveiling of the latest piece for the exhibit. They couldn't believe that another tree would be added so soon, and most of the regulars couldn't wait to see what this one would look like. The new tree was already in place, and as I came up behind the crowd, I could hear them marveling at it. It had gone in just before opening, so I hadn't gotten a chance to peek last night, and as I came to the front to stop anyone from trying to get too close, I felt my breath stick in my throat. It appeared that the new tree was in honor of our old park director, the one who had disappeared after giving the lady her spot as chairman. Dr. Thurston's screaming face was visible from the front of the rich brown wood. His eyes were locked into something resembling sheer terror, and his mouth hung open in an eternal scream. The muscles of his face stood out like bands, and he looked like if he could talk, he wouldn't whisper. I dreaded the night he would add his voice to that chorus, but he never did. He did not whisper. For the next 3 weeks, whenever the sun went down, he screamed like a wounded cat. It was loud and long, a terrified wail that you could hear from across the park. They stopped whispering or yelling about a month later, and we were glad when Dr. Thurston was finally silent. By then, she had added a dozen other trees to the exhibit, and they all whispered their final eulogy for about a month before going silent. These were not the strangest of her creations, but they are the ones I remember the most. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear Dr. Thurston, and it reminds me that summer and spring can be just as brutal as the dead of winter. The lady is a being of great love and warmth, but that warmth can still burn her enemies. When I was 17, I met a man at a diner. I saw him every day. He always sat in my section, and he always ordered the same thing. 3 eggs over easy, grits, toast, and coffee. Leave the pot. I guess I kind of developed a crush on him. He was handsome, but was far too old for me. He looked like he could be in his late 20s, his early 30s, or even his middle 40s all at once. He looked weathered, like he'd seen it all, but when he smiled and thanked me, I could tell that there was still some childhood left in him. We were sitting around a fire near the back of the park, something we did sometimes when we weren't working, and telling stories. There were about 7 of us, myself, Emma, Gala, Randy, Michael, Tobias, and Razzie. Tobias had been the last one to join us, and we were passing a skin of wine around as we threw deadfall wood onto the fire. He'd watched us from the door of the greenhouse, contemplating whether he wanted to come and sit with us or not, and had finally taken a seat next to Randy as he watched the night sky twinkle. As Brandylow, we didn't need to sleep, but we liked to rest sometimes and listen to the world pass. That probably sounds weird, but when you have the kind of time that we have, it's just something that you do. One day there was a robbery. This was in the middle of the Great Depression, and people were getting desperate to find their families. He wore a mask, but I knew the kid with the gun when he told me to empty the register. He was a local. Hell, we went to school together, and I knew that he and his girl were planning to go to California so he could find work. The town had dried up. We all knew it, but the diner had made decent enough scratch off the passers-by. He took the $9.30 we had for the day, and then he started demanding people's wallets. They gave him the wallets, not wanting trouble, until he came to the man that I'd seen. The guy told him that he couldn't have it, and when he threatened to shoot him, he told him he was welcome to try. Emma wasn't telling just any story. She was telling her story, the story of how she'd become a brandy-low, and it made me wish that I had a better origin story. So many of them had lived through great times and seen great things, and I was just given the title by association. I knew I had earned it through service to the lady, but it didn't seem like that. It didn't seem like I had earned it the way that others had. They had achieved it by being found worthy by other brandy-low, worthy enough to be turned in exchange for their creators' lives. He tried to shoot the guy, but the gun went off and the man wasn't even hurt. He reached out and took it from the boy, telling him to leave it before he hurt someone. "Leave those wallets too," he told him. "You didn't earn any of that, and times are too tough for you to be greedy." The kid dropped everything and walked out, gunless and penniless. He and his gal still left, I think, but they did it without stealing. She got a faraway look, and the smile she wore was genuine as she remembered the man who had ushered her into this life. I began to talk to him after that, sitting with him as he ate his meals and asking him how he had done that. He said it had been nothing. The kid hadn't been trying to hit him anyway. I didn't think that was true, but I didn't argue with him. A few months later, he offered to buy me dinner. I thought he was being flirty, but after a few drinks, he told me what he was and asked if I wanted to be it too. She took a big swig of wine as it came to her, her eyes a little misty when she passed it. After the first drink, he did something with the second and made it glow. I laughed. I thought it was just a little trick, but he covered it with his hand before I could take it. "Once you drink this, there's no going back. You have to finish what you started, for better or worse." I told him I could handle whatever he thought he had, and drank it down fast. It burned a little, but I was tipsy by then. So tipsy that I barely recognized how his features were changing. By the third drink, I was starting to notice his goaty appearance, and when I reached for the last drink, I remember thinking that he might start to baa, like a sheep. He sighed when I finished that one, saying it would be good to rest, and he hoped that I had a long life. After that, I was left with an empty chair and a new life, knowing that one day it would be my turn to return the favor. She passed the skin to Razzie, a brandy-low who looked like she had been turned in her early teens, and she tilted it back as she savored the bouquet. Her size seemed to hinder her very little, and I'd seen her do things that I would have otherwise thought impossible, like lifting trees out of displays after a windstorm not too long ago had put them out of place and setting them to rights again. I knew from those around her that she also wasn't some ancient creature, and this was just a reflection of her own inner strength. I wish I'd gotten to know the man who gave me his life better. I was walking home after school, cutting through the woods like I usually did, when I heard strange noises off the path. Mom had always told me to be careful in the woods, but I guess I didn't think bears or mountain lions would make a racket like that. I got low and went creeping into the trees, and there he was, just lying on the ground. Something had cut him up pretty badly, and he was holding his guts in when I came up. There was ice on him, something I hadn't expected to see in August, and as it melted on his shirt, he looked at me with surprise. "It's not safe here," he gasped, gritting his teeth as he tried to act tough. "You should go back before they smell you." I'm not going to leave you here to die alone, I said, not sure why I'd said it, only feeling that it's what I should say. He smiled at me, offering me a hand of his own blood, like some kind of offered cup. I don't know why I drank it, but it just looked so inviting. It shimmered with an eldritch light, the surface rippling and dancing like nothing I'd ever seen. I knelt beside him, drinking slowly from that thick and pungent soup, and after the third sip, he was gone, and I was changed. I never went home. I never saw my family again. After that last drink of his offered cup, I belonged to the lady. She took another sip and looked around, finally holding it out for Toby. Toby started to decline, but Razzie shook it at him. Come on, Tobes, you never talk about yourself. You've been with the lady for longer than anyone else. What's your story? Toby did a half shake, but finally reached out and took the skin, taking a long drink as he savored the wine. His little glasses glinted in the firelight, and I thought that it might be the only time I had ever heard him talk for more than a few minutes. Toby spent most of his time in the greenhouse, tending the plants, and he really only spoke to the lady, not sharing more than a passing word with the other gardeners who worked with him. He was an enigma, but after that night, I felt I truly knew him better. Most brandylow only have a set amount of time. You all know this. We all know this. But I am unique in that respect. They all leaned in, most of them having hoped he would tell his story. I was an alchemist, one of the first scientists in Northern Europe in the 16th century. The church had chased me out of my village, claiming I was a witch or of the devil, but I was living comfortably in the forest with the equipment I had purchased from merchants and some supplies I had collected. It was not a fabulous life, but it was good enough for a man on the run. He took another sip, smacking his lips as he stared at the fire. One night, a woman came to visit me. She was sick and had been wandering half naked in the woods. She said she was being pursued by someone, an enemy from her past, and I felt pity for her. Who better to understand being pursued than an outlaw? I told her that she could rest in my cave, and I would try to figure out what was ailing her. She agreed, and I set to work, looking for a cure to her mystery ailment. Whatever her adversary had hit her with, it was a nasty bit of poison, and it was slowly killing her. I'd never seen anything like it before, but it turned out to be similar to herbicide. I managed to neutralize it. No easy feat when all you have to work with are plants and fungi, but I managed it. The smile he wore was similar to Emma's, the memory of his victory over this unknown poison, clearly a good one. It was while trying to cure this poison that I first encountered her adversary. I was looking for moss, a special kind that grew in the deeps, when I heard hoofbeats. It wasn't rare to hear horses in the woods, but it was uncommon to hear them this deep in the woods. Horses would have trouble getting through the trees, and I got low as I waited for them to pass. Eventually they did, but no sooner was I hunting again than I heard the hoofbeats. They seemed to follow me as I went deeper and deeper into the forest, and I finally stopped and decided to confront the rider. It no longer sounded like many animals, maybe as few as one, and I liked my chances of getting away in this part of the forest. I knew the woods better than anyone, and I believed I was capable of escaping, if it came to it. He shuddered like an icy wind had touched him, and I thought I knew who might be after our pale lady. My confidence broke when he came out of the trees. His armor was the green of a spruce tree, his helmet topped with a rack of magnificent antlers. His horse was bony, emaciated, and looked dead beneath him despite its powerful strides. He had an axe attached to his saddle, and though it was the end of summer, I felt a chill run through me as his hollow-looking helmet settled on me. It looked empty, but I saw 2 coals sparking beneath that visor, and knew it was anything but. "I seek a woman," he said, his voice like a winter wind. "Have you seen a pale woman running through these woods? She may be sick, and I hope to find her before it's too late." I didn't believe a word of it. It sounded as if he hoped to kill her before the poison could, and I found myself shaking my head slowly. I don't think he believed me either, and knowing what I do now, I have no idea why he left me alive. Maybe he simply wasn't at the strength he needed to lift that axe yet, but I doubt it. Most likely, he just didn't consider me a threat and decided it would be better to let me go. Given his parting words, perhaps he thought human greed might win out in the end, because before he turned away, he looked back and offered one final chance for me to join him in his hunt. "If you should find her, seek me out. I will pay you handsomely for her whereabouts." Then he rode off into the woods, and as I watched him go, I saw ice settle on the ground where the hooves of his horse had been. We all sat in silence for a minute, listening to the fire crackle and sharing the wine around to curb the sudden emergence of a chill that had gone through all of us. When I came back with the moss, using it to neutralize the poison, she smiled at me and said she was in my debt. After a few days, after she had regained her strength, I told her about the Green Knight, and she asked if I had told him where she could be found. I told her if I had, she would likely be dead, and I doubted his intentions were good. She thanked me and asked me if I wanted a place by her side as a reward. At first I thought she was implying marriage, but she clarified that she would be happy to take me into her court. I could use someone as skilled with plants as you, and I would feel safer with you at my side. I thought then that she might be some royal involved in a court dispute, but as I turned to decline, she seemed to beg me to reconsider before I'd said a word. She is hard to say no to, as many of you know. So I agreed, and she told me to kneel. I stood up as Brandylow, a maid Brandylow, and my time ends when fate declares it so, not when another must rise. He looked at Randy and I when he said it, and I got the feeling that he wasn't just talking to talk. Were we somehow special too? I got up to follow him as the flask went around again, and he began to head back to the greenhouse. I asked him if Maid Brandylow were different than the rest, and he nodded. He pointed back to the fire, indicating the others as they laughed and joked, and his look was a little sad. When it's time to pass their powers on, they have no choice in the matter. A day, a year, 1,000 summers. None of them know how long they have. You and I, however, do not have that burden. We are Brandylow until we decide to stop. We can be killed. We can fall to the forces of winter. But we can make others freely, without worrying about being unmade. This is done strictly at the lady's discretion, of course, but we are special in that way. He looked back at the fire as Razzie made them laugh and shook his head. I wonder how many of them will still be there when the snows leave. How many new faces will sit where they sat. How many will simply be gone forever. Who can say? He left after that, and I was left to stand and wonder. Cashmere Botanical Garden is wearing its fall colors, and the lady is experiencing her first fall within the gardens. The trees are all covered with red and gold. The faces in the trees have begun taking on a ghoulish cast, and the grounds are filled with kids coming to see our Halloween revelry. The town of Cashmere has a party going on Halloween night, and we've been piggybacking off of it for the last couple of weeks. It's been a whole week of candy, costumes, and a lot of tricks and treats. It all started about a week before October, when the lady came to me with a strange request. Do you know what this Halloween is? I've seen flyers for it, and I'm not sure what is expected of us. She'd come back from the town council meeting, heard the other town heads talk about Halloween preparations, and had questions about what was expected of her. I almost laughed. My lady, have you never heard of Halloween? Looking at her now, she appeared closer to the crone I had first encountered. Her age made her no less beautiful, though. She looked like a woman who'd come fully into her beauty, a woman in the comfort of age. But when she glowered at me, I was afraid I had overreached. It was easy to forget that she was a force of nature when you looked at her angelic face, at least until some of that fury re-emerged. I know of the celebration. It's of the cold one, though, and I'm not as knowledgeable about his holidays. The cold one, the Winter Lord, the Green Man. This was one that I had heard of, but knew very little about. I tell you what, my lady, if you tell me a little of your enemy, an enemy I may have to one day fight, I will tell you all I know of Halloween. What followed was the longest walk I have ever been on, but it turned out to be very informative. The Green Man is the antithesis of my power. He brings the cold. He kills that which I create. But he withers in the heat. He waxes and wanes, grows and fades, and our battle is one that has lasted for ages. His minions are numerous as mine, I suppose, but they are crafty, and they know I am at my weakest. Her gait was slow, her legs stiff as we walked, and it was as if I could watch her age the longer we stayed together. Why would you be at your weakest? I asked. The cold is encroaching, she said, her voice that of someone speaking to a child. When the cold comes, the living world shrinks. The Green Man is at his most powerful when the cold winds howl and the seasons turn away from growing times. This hallowed even. Halloween, I corrected, but gently. Right, Halloween is a time when he is strong. We should all be on our guard, for his minions will doubtlessly come to see this place I have made for myself. I started to ask her something else, but she put a hand up to stop me. I have fulfilled my word. Now it is time for you to share your knowledge with me. Tell me of this Halloween. So I told her everything I knew. I told her about pumpkin carving, corn mazes, candy exchanges, trick-or-treating, costume contests, and everything in between. She wanted to know everything, every little detail, and the more she learned, the more she liked it. When she realized how much the growing of things was involved in the season, the last harvest before winter, she became enthralled. The more I told her, the more you could see working behind the scenes, as she made plans. She would grow, she would build, and she would have a Halloween like no other. Truly, she meant to make this Halloween one to remember in Cashmere. She spent the next 2 weeks preparing. The gardens were closed for event settings, and I watched as she grew apple trees, cornfields from the rocky soil, and pumpkin patches from scratch. We brandy-lows carved gourds, made cider, stuffed scarecrows, and generally set the mood for the coming event. The Pale Lady presided over all of it, directing our efforts as she pulled me away from whatever I was doing to make sure it was all correct. I had become her consultant, it seemed, and she wanted my opinion on everything. We were too busy to keep a proper watch back then, but I am sure they were already lurking around. On October 15th, we reopened, and the lines reflected the curiosity of the community, a curiosity that was rewarded. They had watched the gardens for several weeks with mounting interest, and you could see their eyes grow big as they saw what we had created. I've told you all about the rings, right? They follow a pattern around the park like a clock with the security booth at the center. Each one of the 12 rings usually holds a different exhibit, and when the gates opened that morning, they each held a different Halloween display or activity. There was a whole area of carved pumpkins, complete with a booth for carving your own. Another held the trees with faces, though more of them had been added with scary faces of witches and ghouls. Another was a corn maze that held costumed brandy-low who were ready to come jumping out to scare people. There were games with prizes and apple-bobbing tubs, a cider stall, hay rides on the old trailer pulled by the John Deere we had around back of the sheds, scarecrow contests, seasonal vegetable displays, and their growing cycles, and so much more. It amazed me sometimes to just walk around the park and see the transformation, and it was here that I saw the first one of the Winter Lord's minions. It was the third day when I ran into him, but they had surely been in the park since we reopened. It began as a kid in an orange mask. He shouldn't have stood out. There were lots of kids wandering around in costume, but he did. I was organizing traffic in the park, the crowds at an all-time high, when I saw the bobbing stem of a pumpkin head. I just saw the back of his head, but immediately I was fixed on the guy. I couldn't have told you why, but for some reason, he gave me a shiver. I started making my way towards him, the crowd parting like molasses, and by the time I got anywhere close, he was already gone. I checked the cameras when I got back to the booth, but I couldn't find a trace of the kid either. It was like he had never been there, but it wouldn't be the last time I saw him. The next day, I was giving directions to a couple of tourists who were looking for the cider tent, and that's when I saw him again. This time, I got a good look, continuing to give half-hearted directions as I watched him from my peripheral. He was definitely a kid, maybe 16 or 17, in ratty jeans and a black hoodie. He wore motorcycle boots and fingerless gloves, and the mask he wore was grotesque. It looked like a jack-o'-lantern with a long, lolling tongue worked in plastic that hung across the cheek. The mask was bad, but the eyes were worse. The eyes were far too expressive to be made of plastic, and I could swear they blinked as I watched them. I had just finished pointing to the ring they wanted on the map when he stepped back into the bushes and disappeared from sight. I went to Carl, but he was as much a help as he ever was. "It's just kids playing pranks, kid. Don't let them get you down, and make sure they don't ruin the exhibits." He did help me look, enlisting a few of the others, but we never found the kid. It was like he had vanished, and Carl couldn't find him on the cameras either. He found me, watching me poke the map as I showed the tourists the ring they wanted, But the kid was nowhere to be seen. It was like I was haunted by this pumpkin-headed little brat, and I was beginning to suspect that something was going on. I kept my eyes peeled, but it was hard to maintain that level of vigilance. There was so much going on in the park these days, and I had to be on guard for other things. Aside from the pumpkin heads, we had the usual level of shenanigans. Local kids playing pranks, clueless tourists tromping through things, and the ever-present problems of having so many brandylow housed so close together. Brandylow get restless when there are so many at hand, and fights aren't uncommon when they're housed so close together. The lady's influence was strong here, something that stopped them from becoming deadly, but Carl and I were still up to our eyeballs in problems. Some of the older ones said that this restlessness wasn't uncommon during the waning months, and that this too would pass. Pass or not, I was not looking forward to 6 months of grouchy goats and weird kids skulking around. So when Friday rolled around, and I saw the orange mask again, I fell in quietly behind him and followed. The people he passed seemed to like his mask no more than I did, and I watched more than one pull away in disgust. He was making a beeline for the fair section of the park, and people were giving him a wide berth. He had his back to me, but I could see the stem on the top of his mask bobbing as he swiveled his head right and left. If he was aware of me following him, he gave no indication, and when he turned for the corn maze, I was less than 20 feet behind. I paused at the entrance, wondering if he meant to ambush me inside the maze. It would be the perfect place to jump me, but I wasn't too worried about my ability to take care of a kid who was a head shorter than me. Even so, I gripped the handle of my nightstick as I headed into the lush halls of the corn corridor. There was supposed to be brandylow in here, my own people who could offer me some backup, but I saw that their hiding spots were empty. If I was lucky, they were just on break, but if not, I hoped they were only wounded and not gone forever. I made my way through the gently waving stalks, the walls taller than me, and as I came closer and closer to the center, I felt sure that that's where I would find him. He still had his back to me, his hands linked behind his back, and he looked into the corner of the corn maze when I came up on him. "Are you one of the pale bitch's creatures?" My hackles rose, his words lighting something deep within me. "You will speak of my lady with respect. I am her servant, for now and for always." He turned then, and up close the mask was even less pleasant. It seemed to bulge oddly, the orange skin speckled with blemishes and patches of rot. As he smiled, I came to doubt that it was a mask at all. The outside flexed like rubber, the muscles beneath moving oddly, but as he drug that tongue back into his mouth and showed an ear-to-ear grin of pointed fangs, I suddenly felt my earlier intuition about the eyes had been correct. Whatever it was, it had become his face, and he was more monster than man now. "Good. Then I have a message from her better." He took a step towards me, and it took everything I had not to flinch away. Extending his hand, he had an envelope clutched between thumb and forefinger, the paper a delicate blue with the faintest speckling of red. I reached for it, praying my hands wouldn't shake, and when it came free of his fingers, he leaned in close to whisper in my ear. His breath was as unpleasant as his face, and it felt hot and fetid on my cheek. She was foolish to open herself up like this. When she was on the move, she was hard to pin down, but now we have the lady and all her brandylow in one place, and we mean to end her threat forever." My breath came out heavy, my fear palpable, but I swallowed it as I thought of my lady, my queen of summer and spring, destroyed by something as cheesy as a man in a Halloween mask. "We shall see," I said, putting the letter in my pocket. "My lady has many allies, and she may prove harder to destroy than you believe." "May we meet on the battlefield, then," he said, walking past me. "Then we'll see whose forces are the stronger." He walked out of the maze then, and though I caught sight of him often after that, I never spoke to him again. The pale lady took the letter when I offered it to her, but she must have expected whatever it said, because she sniffed and threw it away. "A declaration of war, just as he sends every year. We shall weather, as we always have," she said, almost boredly. She may have been sure, but the brandy-low around her seemed less than convinced. "We'll rally our allies and repel them, just as we always do. Send out the appropriate missives. I want them all here before Halloween," Carl had said. The festive mood was done, it seemed, and we were a camp preparing for war.